Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you for joining us for another episode as we are deep in season 4 right now, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. Thanks all of you for continuing to subscribe. I'm going to ask you that you continue to do so, that you pass us on, get your friends to subscribe. It helps the algorithm, y'all. It helps more people to tap into the great content that we give to you each and every week around this subject matter of responsible fatherhood. We are still enjoying the 7th overall spot on FeedSpot of all dad-related, fatherhood-related podcasts around the world, which amounts to about 650 of them, and we're sitting at number 7. We were at number 5, and we slid to number 7, so I'm trying to figure out what's that all about. We're going in the wrong direction, y'all. I'm trying to get to number 1, so I need to get to number 1. So let's get those subscribes in. Let's get the engagement going too, because that's something else that improves our algorithm. And so today is no different from the other day. We have a great guest, and we're honored to welcome Acamea. She's a gifted memoirist. Today I was looking at that word and I was like, memoirist, a memoirist. She writes great memoirs, y'all. She's also she writes great essays. She's the author of the deeply moving memoir, Daddy's Little Stranger. Through her work, Acamea masterfully explores the complex emotions of family, identity, reconciliation, resonating with readers worldwide. Her essays have appeared in esteemed publications like the Bellevue Literary Review, the North American Review, and Beyond Words Literary Magazine. She's a featured author. She's been in a lot of different media outlets such as the New York Post, Cosmopolitan, and the Little Hub. She's also a TEDx speaker, y'all. She's offering profound insights on connection and personal growth. She's an Indiana native, now living in Nevada. She holds an MFA from Randolph College, where she's earned the distinction of being a Blackburn Fellow. Let's join. Where's my guest at? Where's she at? Acamea, how you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for that wonderful intro.
Yeah, I try to make people feel all warm and fuzzy inside.
Right, like, I did that.
Makes for a better conversation if you feel good about
Absolutely.
it. Yeah, and so me and Acamea met. Now it's been like 2 years, right?
It has been 2 years. I was just thinking about that, like, has it? But yeah, time flies. Like,
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's been 2 years, but it has. Because it wasn't last October, it was the October before that.
Before 2023, right? 2023.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And so we met at a memoir writing retreat hosted by our good friend Kwame Alexander, who's just burning up the runway right now.
Wow, yeah.
Every time I turn around, he's doing something else amazing.
Emmys and all kind of stuff.
Right. And so to have him spend that time that he spent with us was amazing.
Yeah,
and he finds time to do those kinds of things. But I've often told him, and he knows this, that he's a curator. Like amongst the other gifts that he has a knack of bringing similar minded, similar mission, passion, people together that spins off into something else incredible. I don't think I've not continued a friendship with anybody that I've ever met in one of his curation circles, whether it was with him to Ghana, whether it was going and meeting him and doing something in Virginia or going this place or going that place. going and hanging with you guys that weekend. Like, we just stay together. And he has something special about him that creates these spaces where people just really stay connected, even after he's, gone on to do the next great thing. And so I've always been so appreciative of him with that. And so we always start our podcast off with a very interesting notion, but I'm not going to do it with you today because the whole conversation is going to be about this. And so typically I ask people to tell us their daddy story, but we're not going to do that because that's all we talk about.
That's what the entire book is about.
So talk to me a little bit about what got you so interested in writing.
Writing in general?
Yeah, in general.
Okay, so I played basketball in college, and in my mind,
D1?
no, it was an NAIA school, so not quite D1, but I was a late starter to the game. I played in junior high, and then I kind of forgot about it, didn't play in high school, and then I walked on to my college team. And made the team. So I was playing basketball, I was training, I was hiring all types of, professionals to help me catch up to the other girls who have been playing basketball like their entire lives. But I had this idea in my mind that I was going to the WNBA. So it didn't matter what I majored in. I didn't need any kind of plan or career path. And then when that didn't happen, and I came down to reality, I was like, well, what do I want to do? What else do I like? And I thought about writing, how I was always the type of student that could sit up the night before a paper was due, bang it out and get an A+. Like, writing was always something that came naturally to me. And then I saw an opportunity to cover the Chicago Bulls for just like an online publication. And I was like, well, this allows me to combine my passion for basketball and, writing into one. And that was kind of how I started. And then Yahoo Sports read some of my stuff and brought me on as a contributor, covering the Chicago Bulls for them. And I loved it. Like, it was the only thing that ever gave me the same feeling I felt when playing basketball. And I was like, okay, I think this might be my thing. This is something else that I can really get into and that, feels purposeful and fulfilling. And it just branched out from there. So I started as a sports writer, covering the Bulls, the WNBA, charity basketball tournaments and things like that. And then I just kind of branched out into other topics and subjects because, we're full beings. Like, that's just one aspect of my life that I have thoughts and opinions on and feelings about. So I started writing about other things that mattered to me and that I cared about, and just kind of developed the craft and the skill over time, and started, telling stories that were personal to me that I felt could resonate with others and help them. And that led me down the path to becoming a memoirist, as opposed to, maybe a fiction writer or something. But I may write some fiction in the future. But it definitely it just branched out and grew. And I grew as a writer to where I started, writing more about my personal experiences.
Was it the Jordan Bulls, the Rose Bulls, or the Levine Bulls? Which one?
It was the Rose Bulls. So it was a great era. Derrick Rose. It was when they had Derrick Rose. Rip Hamilton was there because he came home from Detroit. Joakim Noah. I think Jimmy Butler had maybe left already, but Rose. It was the Rose era, so it was still a great time.
That was exciting. It wasn't quite exciting. The Jordan era, but it was still exciting.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. So memoirs. Why there seems to be an uptick in people actually writing memoirs, like more than you hear the term autobiography. People are writing memoirs. Like, what is it about a memoir that you think is so attractive for people who's reading?
I think it's the fact that you can tell it like fiction. Like, you can use storytelling elements with a memoir, whereas with an autobiography or biography, it's often a listing of life events or a listing of life experiences. With a memoir, you can actually shape that into a story to where it can read like fiction, but it's very real. These things happen. Of course, they have to have happened, or else it's unethical, to call it a memoir. But you can craft it with an arc, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and kind of have a connecting thread that pulls people through in the same storytelling format that's engaging and makes people want to come back and read. Whereas, a biography can be a bit more rigid, where Some people enjoy that as well, where you just want to learn the facts about someone's life. It's more for that, but the memoir gives you more flexibility with storytelling.
When you start thinking about writing on a new subject matter, does the idea typically come from your head or your heart?
Hmm. Wow. It may it may start in my head, but I think my heart sends it to my head.
Hmm.
Like, rarely do I look at something, and maybe in the past, I might have looked at something and said, in my head, like, I need to write about this. But I don't often do it unless I also feel it in my heart. So it's like my heart tells my head, we need to write about this. And I have to care about it. Like, I'm not a very good writer if I sit down and try to like write a story about something that doesn't matter to me or doesn't resonate with me.
Hmm.
So yeah, the idea may come from my head, but I actually think my heart gives it to my head.
Yeah, this is something that happened to me as I'm writing this memoir now. Has never happened to me ever, 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 ever. Because I told you earlier that I'm not a read. I'm an audible person.
Mm-hmm.
I hear
Mm-hmm.
very, and I remember very well. But reading, I'm gonna be asleep
Mm-hmm.
after about 3 if I'm not like up.
You get it
Reading
how
is
you
a
get
sedative for me,
it.
right? Reading is like taking a sedative for me. And so when I was writing this section, and it happened at the retreat too. Now that I'm thinking about it, and I don't know if you remember when I was writing that piece about my father and writing about his death, that I
Hmm.
got emotional.
Hmm. I remember. Yeah.
I think it was the first time that I've ever gotten emotional reading something that I wrote.
Wow.
Does that happen to you when you're writing?
It does happen to me, and I think it's prone to happening when you're writing about your life, because a lot of times you're talking about things that you may not have really talked about before or may not have gone into deeply, where you may have mentioned it, but when you're writing about it, you're going deep into like experiences and feelings, and in a way that you may not when you're just like telling someone. So it's happened to me, but I have this theory that when you're writing, like, if it doesn't move you, it won't move anyone. So if it moves me, and it gets me emotional, then I know, like, okay, I did this. I did what I came to the page to do, and I expressed it in a way that will resonate with others. Because if you don't feel anything, nobody else is going to feel anything.
Yeah, that's a good thought because now it happens a lot. Like
Mhm.
I'm reading, and I sit there and I'm like, because it almost feels like I'm going back, like I'm
Mhm.
there,
Mhm.
like I'm a part. I could literally be immersed in
Mhm.
whatever it is I'm talking about, and I think it is because I'm being so descriptive,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and it's not like writing an autobiography where it's yeah,
This
19
happened, yeah.
this happened, that happened, and we was here and there
Mhm.
was there. And people actually read those in a factual way, right? They're
Yeah.
not reading it for emotion,
Mhm.
they're reading it for information. But when you draw people and they can feel like they're right there with you,
Mhm.
and I think there was something about that that kind of stimulated my writing again, because I'm a writer as well.
Yeah.
But being able to now like have figured out because the other thing that I think I mentioned this at the retreat again
Mhm.
as we talk. Me and Kwame joke about this as well. I was like, man, I can't read a piece of poetry to save my life. Because if it don't rhyme like Dr. Seuss, it don't make no
I
sense.
don't, yeah, I don't get you. Like, I don't get it. But no, that's like they say, that's why visualization works, because your brain doesn't know the difference between being actually there and it actually happening and you imagining it happening. So it makes sense that, like you said, when you write memoir, you're descriptive. You're talking about how you felt. You're talking about what the room looks like. You're talking about what the people and your loved ones were doing and how their hair and like all these details. You're getting so granular and getting down into it. It can absolutely transport you back to that place, and that's going to bring up those same emotions. So it makes absolute sense. You're taking yourself back to whatever that place is, and if there's some emotion attached to it, it's going to come up.
Yeah. And so, which is why I think it's just so cool that you wrote this book in memoir form, because even just the pieces that I was reading, I was right there with you. Now, I was right there with you for several other reasons too,
Mm-hmm.
because some of what I was reading was reflective of my own life, and I could kind of see,
Mm-hmm.
I could be there with you. And where things weren't reflective of my own life, I've been in this work for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's reflective of somebody's life I
Mm-hmm.
know. And so when I'm looking at this, like the stories for me, I tell people I'm doing this work. I mean, I got 20,000 stories in my head from people that I've encountered over the course
Wow.
of my career of doing responsible fatherhood work. So nothing's new to me
Mm-hmm.
except for the emotion. The emotion is always different but the same,
Yeah,
depending who I'm,
distinctive.
yeah, depending on who I'm talking to. Give me the 50,000-foot view of your daddy before we dig in.
Hmm. Uh, I really can't. And that's part of the story, is that I
Mm,
don't know enough about him to craft a view of him. He's like this enigmatic figure in my life, not even in my life, but this enigmatic idea, of this role that this person may have played in my life or should have played in my life, or that you would expect to play in my life, but he wasn't there. So the 50,000-foot view of him is, just an outline of a figure. He doesn't feel like a real person, um, to me,
mhm,
because I don't know enough about him to even craft an idea of who he
mhm.
is, or who he was.
But that makes sense given what you see from 50,000 feet, right? It's like
Yeah,
flying in a plane and looking out the
yeah,
window.
that's true.
Like, I know I'm over Nevada,
Hmm.
and I know there's some people and things down there, but
I
it's
can't see him,
abstract,
right?
right? And
That's true.
I don't have any emotion with it.
Hmm.
It's just it's there. I
I know
know
it's
it's there.
there. Hmm.
And that's why I asked the question that way, because typically when I ask people in the beginning of the podcast to tell me a daddy story, they'll always say, "You want me to tell you about?" I'm like, "Your daddy story is your daddy story." It's like, don't ask me to frame it
All
for you.
right, you.
Like, whatever you say is your story. So what you just said is your story.
Mhm.
It's when I hear it, it frames for me exactly what your daddy's circumstance, the story. I don't have to know the gory details, right?
Mhm.
Or beautiful details in it. But if you tell me that, it's like, oh, now I know something about her, an element
Mhm.
about her that possibly had an impact in other areas of her life.
Mhm.
And then when I talk to some people who they're a little more broad, and what they'll do is they'll give me that 50,000 foot view of their own father, but they'll give me a 10-foot view of their own fatherhood, meaning them being a father.
Mm.
Right? They'll narrow down and be like, oh, but now let me tell you about my kids. Let me tell you about
Mhm.
my baby, that.
That's
And it's,
interesting.
yeah, and it's like, okay, yeah, but it's your story is your story,
Yeah.
right? And so, but that's why I asked the question. What was it? What was the stimulating factor that made you think about actually writing about it before we get into the storyline itself? I want to know what it was to which your heart told your brain, or your brain told your heart, which one was talking to which one, right? Said, you need to write about this.
Mhm. For the longest time, for most of my adult life, I felt like not having a father didn't affect me. So I didn't
Mm,
feel like there was even anything there to write about. And then as I got older and I could start to really see myself and why I may behave the way that I do, whether in relationships or just the person I've become, I started to think about how it could relate to me not having a father, and not simply not having a father, but how the little girl felt who wanted the father. Even if I'm okay now, there was this little girl who waited, for her father, and wished and hoped that he would come for her. And that not happening affected her in some way. It can't have not had an impact, because she was devastated, and that little girl grew into me, and I know that she's still inside of me. And so even if I feel like a fully functional adult, there are still some aspects of me that I know were impacted or hindered or stunted by what this little girl had to become to protect herself, so to speak, and to
Mhm.
preserve herself. So I started looking at it from that perspective. And my initial thought was just to write a collection of essays because I didn't feel like I had enough. I was like, this isn't a story. Like, there's no story here. There's some events that happened, and I didn't really see it as a thing that was connected. It wasn't until I got my book deal that the publisher was reading it, and they were like, this should be a memoir. Like, a lot of these essays have similar themes. All you have to do is move some things around, but you may not be able to see it. But a lot of these essays are connected by themes, themes of loneliness, themes of detachment, things like that. And it took someone else to tell me that for me to be able to see it. And
Mm.
once they said that, I was able to look at it and say, wow, like there is a story here that started. And, it continued on into adulthood. It wasn't just a series of detached events. There is actually a story here.
Mhm. I wish that many of the folks that have come across my path and that are in my path right now would come to that epiphany.
Mm,
That thing to which they struggle with is an entire story. It's not just an event, which
mhm,
is why it's so prevalent in their lives. The fact that you were clear in understanding that it's the little girl in you that won't let this go. I don't know if
mhm,
you remember when I did that piece at the retreat. One of the last things I talked about was having to speak to the little boy inside of me. Like,
mhm.
I've always known that little boy
Was there.
existed. That part
Mhm,
of what my issue was his craving for it,
mhm.
not my adult craving,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you can't dismiss that person inside of you, particularly that little boy, a little girl,
Mhm.
when that occurs. What was the most difficult piece of the book for you to write? The one that you had to, I gotta write about this, but I really don't feel like it right now. I gotta wait till tomorrow. I gotta be in a better space, and
Mhm.
was just difficult for you to get through.
Mm. Probably all of the early stuff, actually
Mm,
sitting with that little girl and being honest about how she felt, and about the things she was experiencing and enduring, because that's something that I'd never explored before. Because, like you were saying, I was looking at it as my adult self and not really allowing myself to see that that little girl makes decisions for me on occasion.
mm,
That little
yeah.
girl, has impact in how I move through the world and how I engage with people, whether I know that or not, whether I want to accept that or not. So actually sitting with that little girl and feeling her feelings, about sitting in front of the window waiting for her father to come after she was just, devastated from learning that the man she thought was her father wasn't. And just all of that early stuff was probably the most difficult because I had to actually go back and be that little girl and feel how
Mhm.
she felt and be honest, about what she was feeling.
Right. Tell me, walk me through your first experiences of remembering him, interacting with him, your dad, your biological dad,
Hmm.
or who you thought was your biological. No, let's go to your biological, then we can go back to the non.
Hmm. My first experience with him,
Yeah.
I just remember he
That,
showed up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
that you remember.
Yeah. The first experience I remember is him taking me to, I'm from Gary, Indiana, and we had a little strip mall there called the Village. It's still there, but not in its same form. Um, he picked me up and took me to the Village to get some shoes, a pair of shoes. Um, and that's my first memory of meeting him. But I just remember, like, he's a big dude. Like, he's 6 feet. he was muscular. He played football in high school, so he was this big dude, and we actually look alike. And I just remember he was very quiet, like he didn't know what to say or how to relate to me. This is me, and as an adult, remembering that time. But of course, as a kid, I'm just like, oh, I'm with my daddy. We're going to get shoes, and it felt a little strange because he was, by all accounts, a stranger to me. But the fact that he took me and he got me these shoes and he held my hand and we got hot dogs at the village and things like that, it made me feel like he loved me. Um, yeah, so I accepted him as my father, and I actually wanted to love him, wanted to love him back. So that was my first memory of him taking me to get a pair of shoes, brought me right back home, dropped me off. Who knows where he went after that. But we never really spent extensive time together. Like going to get the shoes, that was maybe an hour or two, a little outing. We may have had another outing here or there, but it was always just like these little quick moments together. I've never like been to his house or spent the night or anything like that. It was just we went on a couple of short outings, and then he would bring me back home. But that's the first memory, like him taking me to get some shoes, which I took as him taking care of me.
And that's probably how he thought.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people, it's like, there's the truth, and then there's everyone's perspective of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we rarely get to the truth because everybody has their own view of what the truth is or
Yeah.
what the truth means. And if you don't know all the truths, it's very hard to know the truth.
Right.
Right. And so if he is unexpressive in articulating what he's going through,
Mm-hmm.
or her for that matter, because I want to take a step back and gleam a little bit on mom, right? Because from my relationship and not seeing my dad until I was 23 years old, I always thought that it was really because of him, like that he was the perpetrator in this
Mm-hmm.
really evil movie that I crafted in my head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was much, much older that my mother finally told me the truth. And it wasn't him, it was her family
Mm-hmm.
that pushed him away and kept him away. And
That
this is
happens
at
often.
this was at the time that there was no Facebook, right?
Right. Or you can just go and find them. Yeah.
So you're
You're
gone,
gone,
right? You could
right?
be
You're just
gone
gone,
now,
right?
gone. And so, but as a result of that, like it really put a strain on me and my mother's relationship. I literally
Yeah.
didn't talk to her for almost 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
because that was devastating to me.
It's a betrayal in a sense.
Yeah, when it comes to your mom, because you mentioned in the book that your mom, that there was a little bit of movement, right, with
Mm-hmm.
respect to you being able to really settle in and really kind of understand and see what positive, strong, healthy manhood look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where in the scenario did you place her? Did you have any animosity? Did you not? Did you even know that you had it or shouldn't had it? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where was she in your mind
Mm-hmm.
in that early scenario?
I had a lot of animosity towards her, especially when I was younger, a lot of resentment. Not because I necessarily felt like she kept me from my father, or maybe it was like I really don't know, when you're a child, where you sometimes don't know when you're a child where that's coming from. But
Mm-hmm.
so maybe I did blame her and I didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
But as I started to get older, and as a child, I did have some animosity and resentment towards her because of what I felt she may have put me through, not even just with my father, but boyfriends and situations that I was in that, weren't favorable or weren't just, or that were hurtful, if I'm just being blunt. I
Mm-hmm.
blamed her for, in a sense, like not protecting me. And whether rightfully so or not, I did carry some animosity and some resentment about that for a long time. And then as I started to get older, and I could see it from her perspective, like my mother was 18 years old when she had me. she was a child, you know?
Mm,
She was
yeah.
a child. And so now I look at it like she was still becoming an adult. Like, of course, she didn't always do the right thing. She didn't know the right thing to do. Like, 18 is a child trying to raise a child, and she's in her own difficult situations with the men she's married to and dating, being mistreated and things like that. And it's like, how do you deal with that at such a young age?
Right.
So, children are selfish. Like, just to be honest, children are selfish. Children rarely think about, things outside of themselves. And it could
Hmm.
be, selfish in a good way and selfish in a bad way. That's why they say we should hold on to like our childhood imaginations and the way we, fought for what we wanted and things like that. But I couldn't see it from her perspective when I was that young. It took me maturing, physically and emotionally, to be able to look and say, wait a minute, she was 18 when she had me. She was in this marriage that was, concerning, where a lot of things were happening to her. So it
Okay.
wasn't only me that suffered, but it's like, if you're being mistreated and you're this young, of course you're going to make some mistakes and you're not going to be always able to make the best decisions, and you're fighting for your own survival, and your
Hmm.
kids are being caught up in the mix. So that's how I look at it now, and it's helped me heal a lot because I do understand. I look at, like, I have 18-year-old nephews and nieces, and I couldn't imagine them being in that situation. So that
Hmm.
gives me a lot of perspective. The fact that she was so young and she was basically a kid trying to navigate, all these concerning relationships and difficult situations that she was placed in, let
Hmm.
alone trying to protect and nurture her children.
Yeah, when I have a documentary called Spit and Anger, and the documentary explores the anger, guilt, and other negative emotions that particularly men and boys have as a result of not having their fathers available and present in their lives.
Mhm.
And some years after it was done, I had this idea to do Spit and Anger 2,
Mm,
TOO, not 2, TOO, and explore the same emotions in women and girls.
mm,
And I did about 3 interviews and I had to stop.
mm,
It was too much because there was too many other elements of their story that
mhm,
I could not wrap myself
mhm,
around
mhm.
with respect to thinking that someone could do that to a little girl.
Yeah.
And there was a challenge in me trying to think about how can I tell the story I'm trying to tell without it becoming another story,
Mhm.
right? So in our work, it has typically been much easier, and I think normal when we talk about father absence and the impact of father absence to lean on um, boys,
Mhm.
right? That's just
Mhm.
natural. Typically,
Yeah.
when you talk about boys. When you talk about women, you talk about girls.
Mhm.
And so there is an increasing conversation. In fact, one of my best friends just got his doctorate, and his thesis was on Black daughters.
Mm.
So, how did that relationships or those relationships impact you when it came to interacting with men in your life
Mhm.
outside of father,
Mhm.
men in general?
Yeah, what you just said is actually a big reason why I wrote the book. When you were asking me what prompted me to write the book, is that, like you said, when we talk a lot about boys needing their fathers, which is true, but there's always like, oh, boys need their dads and they need someone to show them how to be a man and this and that, and it's all true, but rarely do we talk about women, girls needing their fathers and what they miss out on and not having their fathers, unless it's from, a very negative standpoint of, you want to label a girl with daddy issues if if she's what you consider to be promiscuous,
Mm-hmm.
is you just kind of dismiss her as having daddy issues. And that's really like the only way I've ever heard it talked about with girls. So with me, I was like, well, that's not my story. I get the reasoning. You may be looking for the love that you didn't get from your father in other men, But that wasn't my story. That's not the route I took. So I felt like this other side of the story needed to be told, and these other things that, a girl could potentially get or miss and not having a father needed to be discussed to turn her into a full person, and someone who has other needs and things like that you could get from a father. But I believe it affected my relationships with men, and I just always was very detached. Like I didn't very detached in relationships and men, and I think that's what they loved about me, because it's like I didn't care. I never emotionally invested. So it's just I was like a challenge, like, oh, I want to make her fall for me or make her love me, and it rarely work. Like I could so easily just move on and never think about you again, because I had years of practice of that.
You actually, in your book, you call it a syndrome. I saw it somewhere, and I was reading it. It was there's a psychological name for what you're describing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That detachment, or using that detachment. I can't. I wish I
Yeah,
had
it's
a
an
mark with the
attachment
book.
style. It's an attachment style. It's
Yeah.
an attachment style that's actually detached.
Okay.
Detached from relationships. So you never emotionally invest. And I'm always in control. I was always in control because I wasn't the one emotionally investing. So if things ended or we had to go our separate ways, I could do it easily, never speak to you again, and be just fine. But I had years of practice doing that with my father. It started very young. I had to forget about him and go on about my life in order to just be okay. And so I unknowingly brought that into adulthood, and that's just how I engaged with men. And it wasn't intentional. I didn't know how to emotionally invest. It felt more natural to me not to invest than it would have felt to attempt to, emotionally attach to a person. That was what felt uncomfortable and unnatural for me. And it's something I've been working to unravel, because I have, as I've gotten older, I've gotten out of it a little bit, or I intentionally try to emotionally invest. And I actually enjoy it. Like it's beautiful to connect with someone on those deeper levels. So yeah, that's been my
Yeah, I
ongoing
was
work.
going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. Um, where is your confidence in men
Mm.
to, on a scale of 1 to
Ooh,
10?
that's a question, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Where is my confidence in men? I try not to be one of those people that generalize and say like all men are this or all men are like this. There are some common traits
Yeah, we all got them.
right, that I've found, but my confidence in men is growing. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say it's maybe at a 5, maybe average. Like I'm not overly confident, but I also try not to be pessimistic, about it. I try to take each person that I meet as their own person and give everyone, a fair chance and not make assumptions. But I say it's at a 5. I'm about average in terms of my confidence in men.
See, I think 5 is a reactive
Hmm.
answer, not a proactive answer.
Explain that. Wow.
5 gets you on the fence and not having to make a real decision left or right.
Okay. Hmm. Interesting.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you say 4 or 6, right? 4 tells me there's still some stuff there
Mm-hmm.
that she ain't quite
Mm-hmm.
got her, that's gonna get her on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a 6, it's like, okay, well, most of the negative stuff has at least
Is out the way.
is manageable,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually expecting you to say 5.
Really? Wow. So I proved you right. But you're right. 5 is a very safe answer. You're right. You're right. It's a very safe,
It's a
non-committal answer.
non-answer.
Yeah.
5 is a non-answer.
But you know what? Like I've recently I've been in just some like very transformative relationships.
Mm,
So I am thankful for that and I'm grateful for that. Even if it doesn't last, like I don't take that as failure because
mhm.
everything isn't meant to last. Like I believe people come into your life to teach you things and to help you grow, or maybe you teach them things and you help them grow, but and that's it. And that doesn't mean it was a failure. You did what that union was meant to do, and then it's time to move on. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I have to think about that. Maybe I am a 6 and I don't want to commit to being a 6.
Commit. Yeah, or somebody's listening, you're like, nah,
Right, let me change that. No, no, but you're right. 5 is like the safe non-committal answer, not one way or the other. So, but maybe I am a 6 because I have grown a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the biggest epiphany point you had when you were writing the book? Because sometimes when you're writing about yourself, you could be writing and you'll write something, you're like, whoa, where'd that come from? And then you start thinking about it. It's like, man, I never thought about this before. I never thought about this way before. Was there any element of the book that you got to that literally stopped you in your tracks and you had to like really think about where did that come from?
Yeah, and it came when I was talking about like dating and how I would be in relationships, just putting those puzzle pieces together. I knew I was always kind of emotionally detached, but I was just like, that's how I am. And I didn't really see the ways that I didn't really see the walls that I'd built until I
Mhm.
started writing about those stories, and I saw the common themes, and I saw how resistant, I was to being loved and cared for. And I started to see my detachment as a defense mechanism as opposed to just being like, oh, that's who I am. I'm just having fun and this is great. I
Mhm.
started to see it as a defense mechanism. And that was an aha moment for me, or an epiphany, because I never saw it that way before. Like there's
Wow.
something that I am afraid of that's encouraging me to stay emotionally detached.
Mm. You talking about emotionally attached. You and I have an similar emotional response to the Will Smith episode.
Mm,
Um, and I have probably seen that thing 500 times because I used to use
mhm,
it in my presentation. I believe it's in my first documentary.
mm.
And without fail, I don't care where I am, where I'm watching that.
Break
It could come
down.
across my Facebook page. If I just watch it, I
Mhm,
cannot get through it without crying because there's
mhm,
something in that. What resonated with you in that clip?
mhm. Just how he was this. I saw myself in him in that, in that character, that role, because he was this adult, very grown, man who still had this little boy inside of him that I don't even he think he knew it was there until his father didn't show up at the end. And then, because he tried to be like, I'm great without him. I turned out, this one, that one. That's exactly how I viewed myself. That's what helped me be able to tell me that it didn't matter, or that not having my father didn't affect me. Because I was always
Mhm.
like, I don't know. I turned out great. I have this
Right.
career, I have this career, and I'm a writer, and I accomplished this, and I played basketball. Like I turned out great. And so it's what we tell ourselves to protect ourselves from those deep-seated emotions that we may not even know are there until an event brings them back up. And that's what resonates with me about that clip, is that he really believed that about himself. And until his father came back into his life, he was fine. But as soon as he came back, the little
Right.
boy came back,
Right.
and he was able to be hurt again by the same things that hurt him, 20, 30 years ago. And that's really what does it for me.
Yeah. What a lot of people don't know about that episode for me in my work, while that scene for most people is the most important scene in that episode, there's another scene that I believe that is even more important in that episode,
Which
because
one?
people gloss over this scene. So remember when him and his dad came back from the amusement park and he had the big bunny rabbit, I think it was a bear or bunny rabbit or something, and they're joking and they're laughing. And Uncle Phil starts to get on him and tell him that this is the same man. Uncle Phil is trying to tell him.
Yeah. Like, don't get your hopes up. Don't remember all the
Yeah.
times he let you down. Yeah.
But do you remember the last thing he said to him before he burst out the door?
No, what was
Remember what he
that?
said? He said, "You're not my father."
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That crushes me. Like, because here's a man who stepped up,
Yeah.
filled that hole and that gap, and you turn to this man. And that's why I always tell men in my work, never, ever, 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 ever try to stand in the footsteps of a child's father.
Because you just can't fill those shoes. Because it's true. For all intents and purposes, he was his father. He didn't birth him, but he was that role in his life. And I experienced some of that too. Like I talk about in my book, how who I thought was my father continued to try to be in my life, and I just couldn't, do it anymore once I knew that he wasn't my father. And just other men, like my mother remarried, and he, tried to be a father to me, and I just, I debunked it. I resisted it for the same reasons, because I just had this idea in my head, like, you are not my father. Like, don't tell me what to do. All that, everything, that he went through. And that is very interesting. It's just something about that when you hold that knowledge in your head that this person isn't your father. Unfortunately, it clouds your perception, of everything that they do. So like you said, you can't try to stand in those footsteps, unfortunately. But wow, yeah, that was a
Yeah.
powerful moment.
And the second side of it is, neither can moms. Like I hear mom says, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like, it will come back. It will backfire on you.
Yeah.
Like, be as super as you have to be. So my saying is always, fathers can be compensated for but never replace. So a step compensates for the whole. They compensate for the pain. They compensate for those things, but they can't replace it, because that space is reserved for that person. It's the same thing on the mom side. Like, a mom is, another woman gonna come in and say,
Right.
"I'm your mom."
Right.
We
Right.
just don't
My mother,
recognize it.
yeah.
Yeah, you don't recognize them as equal, but they are equal in your heart. And you know where else they're equal to? That little person who's inside.
Yeah, that little person. That's what it is. And I think that may be because I'm trying to think, like, what is it about that makes us kind of shun other people who attempt to take on that role, no matter how great they are. Is like we just won't let them cross, certain thresholds. And that's something I talk about too. I think it's just this knowledge that this person that's supposed to want you doesn't want you, or this person that birthed you, this person
Right.
that you belong to biologically, it means something. And that person is supposed to want you and hold that role in that space in your life. And you just won't let anyone else have it.
Right. Do you journal as well? Do you also journal?
I'm not a journaler, but right now I'm reading a book called The Artist's Way. And one of the things that the author suggests is every morning you write morning pages, which is 3 pages of just stream of consciousness. So I've been doing it lately, but I am not, really a journaler. I haven't historically been a journaler.
Because I would wonder if you would have a suggestion or encourage particularly other women and girls who are going through similar experiences. How therapeutic would journaling be, or just writing?
It could be. And journaling is writing. It's just a different type of writing. When journaling, you're writing, you're just getting your thoughts down on the page. You're not crafting a story. You're just getting your thoughts out, and that can be therapeutic because a lot of the pain comes from holding it in. So it can be therapeutic. It just so happens for me, I'm a writer, so I'm getting the thoughts out of my head in a way that tells a story. But I definitely believe it can be therapeutic just to get all those feelings, out of your head and onto the page, say all those things you've never said, and, express all those feelings you've never expressed, knowing that you're not going to hurt anyone's feelings because it's just for you. It's just for you and no one's going to see it. I think that can definitely help it be therapeutic.
I think that the storytelling element is the piece of it too. Ayanna Van Zant, when I interviewed her for my documentary, said to me, Kenny, we just need to start naming our pain, right? And the problem with us reconciling our pain is because we won't name it. We just allow it to be there, but we don't name it. And that is where my mind says writing is important because you get to name it.
Yeah, for sure. And it can help you name it because you may not know what it is. Like, I didn't know what to name my pain until I started writing about it. And because it forced me to think about it, it forced me to sit with it. And that's the difference between writing an essay collection and actually writing a memoir. I had to sit with it longer. As an essay, I tell the story and I'm done. I'm on to the next thing. But if it's a memoir, I have to sit with this idea and these thoughts and these feelings for extended periods of time. And only then could I even know what to name the pain. Before that, I was just angry. I was just resentful. I just held animosity. I was just detached, and none of those things were really the root of what I was feeling.
If you were to talk to, here's a better question. I'm sure this has happened. I'm sure you've already done book signings.
Yeah.
Right.
I have.
What's the biggest questions? What's the number one question you get from women who read the book, who come up to you? What are they seeking from you?
I was probably the biggest question, the most common question I get is asking me if I've reached out to my father or tried to repair that relationship. And the answer is no. If you read the book, you'll see that I did actually find him online. Like you said, now we're in the age of Facebook to where nobody is just gone. If you're gone in today's age, it's because you're doing it intentionally. So yeah, I got online and found him, found a news story about him, found his Facebook page, but I had no intent in reaching out. I really do feel like, I don't have that longing for him or that yearning for him, as an adult. So it's not out of, spite, oh, I hate him, I don't want to say anything to him. He just very much feels like a stranger to me. And I don't have that void inside of me that I feel like he could feel.
What are you writing now?
Well, I am writing a book about physically disciplining children. Yeah. Have you heard Spare the Rod?
I got to come back on so we can talk about that.
Have you heard the phrase, spare the rod, spoil the child?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the foundation of it. That's the basis of it. And how we've used it to justify kids being the only exception to the rule against hitting. We can't hit anyone else. You can't come up and slap me. I can't come kick your dog, but we can hit children for some reason. So it's just,
I never thought about that from that perspective. That's crazy. Thanks for giving me that. I'll have to use that. Yeah. I never thought about it that way before. Wow. No, there's in the book that I'm writing now about aging, one of the exercises that I've been taking a couple of people I've got interviewed. When I write, I never talk to anybody. I never read anything. I don't want anything influencing my mind and what I'm writing. But sometimes I'll have conversations with people just to kind of make sure that the theory makes sense and those kinds of things. But I've been posing a question to people and having them answer just to kind of get some insight on how they're thinking. And it is, can you remember the first time in your life that you worried about how someone saw you? The very first time. And do that. You don't have to do it all right now, but I'll tell you the first thing that I came up with, I've gone back since, but I'll tell you the first thing that I came up with And it was me and my mother getting into an argument because she wanted me to go to the store to purchase something with food stamps.
Wow, that's heavy.
And then when I was exploring it, thinking about, well, Kenny, you got to ask yourself the second question, which is, why did that matter to you? Because I didn't want my friends to see me. Why did that matter to you? Because they would think I'm poor. Well, why did that matter to you? Like I can't. So that's what's going to happen.
Wow.
You keep winding back, and that was just the first one. And then one day I was doing something else, and the second and final one hit me, which is what you just talked about, which I thought that whole notion of being poor was the first time in my life that I really cared about how people saw me, until I began to start thinking about how fear did it first.
That's the part right there. How we prioritize fear over love.
Right. And I went back to thinking about, wow, because fear was, don't you come out, don't you go out here and act no fool with blah, 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 blah. Right? Don't you do this. I'm going to whoop your, don't get your toes. It was always a fear factor.
Yeah, governed by fear.
Yeah. And so that was when I started doing that, then I was able to go back a little more and think about, I couldn't do this in front of mommy. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. And her whole thing was, don't embarrass me out here. Blah,
Right,
blah, blah, blah,
right.
blah.
Or you gonna get it. You gonna get it. Yeah.
So we don't know sometimes how far that carries into our life. And we transfer those things onto our own children.
Absolutely.
Not understand. Now think about this as a crazy, I don't know if this is part of your book, I probably shouldn't tell you this, I'm gonna tell you. Right. Think about this. The conversation now around discipline is that we need to rethink how we discipline our children. But think about what we used to, as a people, what we used to laugh at and frown upon with other cultures, particularly white families. When little Timmy was in the middle of the floor, flipping around on the floor, and she's like, come on, come on, come on. And we're like, oh, hell no.
He need his butt whooped. Right. Look how he embarrassing you, how he acting over here.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And so now we're coming around to that understanding. Now, we still don't want our kids flipping out in the middle of the store. But how you deal with it and how you speak about it has to change. And it has to change because we have to get away from command and demand language, not negotiable language, right? Which is, there's a consequence for you staying there, and there's also a consequence for you not doing that anymore. Right, which is what they try to do. If you get up off the floor, I give you ice cream cone when we get home, right? Because it's behavioral change. That's what discipline was supposed to be, right? It's supposed to change behavior. But it's a more positive way. But we thought, I ain't giving you no damn ice cream cone. You better get off.
You better get up, right? Because I'm gonna tell you what's gonna happen if you don't, right? You're not getting a reward,
Right, but as an adult, we thinking that children are reasoning on the same level that we're reasoning. They're not. It's you present something to change a behavioral aspect of what they're doing for a means to an end, until they can reason and realize that, flipping out in the middle of is probably not the best way for me to get ice cream when I get home, right? No matter how much I do that. And so, and it's interesting how society has now flipped, but when you added the element about, can't touch the dog, can't strike the tree, can't.
But you can hit a kid. But you can hit a kid, and it's almost this viewpoint as though, first of all, children are property. They belong to you. You can do what you want to do with your kids. Right. Second of all, they're not as human as we are, because we can do this to them. But that's the argument for it, is that you can't reason with a child the way that you can, even a teenager or someone older. And my counter to that is the ability the inability to reason with them the same way is all the more reason why they don't really understand being subjected to like this barrage of physical pain. Like they just know that it hurts. And so they may
Right.
not do the thing because they're afraid of being hit, you know, of being
Right.
hurt again. But they don't really fully comprehend why this person that claims to love me is hurting me, you know, so
Right.
bad. So I'm looking at that like unraveling those two things, because I was raised by my grandmother. She was a strict disciplinarian, and I believe she loved me, you know, and she also like hurt me, you know, and not just me. She, you know, she whooped everybody. It wasn't just me.
Right.
So trying to hold those two things, because I don't know if you've read All About Love by Bell Hooks.
No.
Yeah, and All About Love, Bell Hooks says that, you know, you can't do that to a child and claim to love them. You care for them. And I don't
Right.
know that that's 100% true. I get what she's saying and why she's saying it, but I do believe my grandmother loved me, or that she believed, you know, she loved me.
Mhm.
And she wasn't doing this like out of malice or, you know, or to be cruel. But it is like a better way. And you bring up the example of little Timmy in the grocery store flipping out, like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. But also, little Timmy knows a freedom that children who were governed by fear can never know. Like, little Timmy is going to grow up and express himself. He's going to tell people what he wants and what he thinks, and he's going to go for it. Whereas we grow up, and oftentimes we're afraid to speak. You know, we're afraid to speak up. We're afraid to use our voice, because our voice got us into trouble, you know, when we were younger. So there has to be, you know, a balance, you know, a happy medium. Of course, you don't want your kid acting a fool in the store, but also you want them to be able to fully develop, you know, emotionally, and develop their agency. Like they say, the thing is, you know, a kid will not do something because they're afraid to do it. But if you teach them why they shouldn't do it, they can
Right.
self-govern, because now they understand why this isn't the right thing to do. So
Yeah, but we also know that parenting is we talk about this in our work. You know, parenting is a learned behavior, right? You learn how to parent it. You learn how to parent through which you were parented, right? And some of what your grandmother did, my grandmother did, my mother did, my grandmother, that was learned behavior,
absolutely,
right? There wasn't no psychology
yeah,
in it,
none. All right.
right? None of that, no explanation as to why this doesn't matter. This is how you do it, right? This is how you do it. The other thing was another element that I thought about that again needs to be talked about, and that is it was the most extreme way to change behavior, while at the same time the necessary way to keep you safe. Because if you were born in the 20s, if you were a child in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and you wild out like that in front of the wrong people, get you killed.
So it's like, I want you to be afraid to behave that way. I want you to be afraid to go down that street or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't rest on you reasoning not to look a white woman in the eye because they told you not to.
Yeah.
Right? In the house, we're trying to empower you and we're trying to make you a man, or we're trying to make you a strong woman. But there are places that you're going to go that is actually a negative for you.
Right, I agree. And I've been looking at that too. There's a lot of different reasonings that go into it, and a lot of roots, cultural, religious, societal, because what's interesting is, if we want to say that's a factor in our culture, then what explains why other cultures, you know, engage in it? It may not be as prevalent, but
Right.
it happens. Like Matthew McConaughey, he has a memoir called Green Lights, and he talks about how his father used to just whoop his tail, you know, the same way. You know, we were whipped, him, his brothers, but he feels like he doesn't consider himself, you know, abused or a victim, because he knew his father loved him. He says that. So that's what, you know, complicates the issue. It's a very complex issue with a lot of layers, but that's what has me thinking, like, okay, well, why does he feel like this was okay? And what made his father think this was the way to discipline him. He's in a completely different culture.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it's important. Because of course, when you love your children, you're not setting out to harm them, I don't believe, but I do think it's important to just speak up for these kids and talk about what it can do to them, how it can stifle your emotional, and mental development.
Yeah. So the book, ladies and gentlemen, is Daddy's Little Stranger, Acamea Dead Weiler. Incredible book. Got a little hole in it because of the green screen going on, but it's a memoir. And now that I'm done talk to you, you probably don't force me now to sit here and read. It's gonna take me a minute, but I'll holler at you when
I'm patient. I'm patient.
I might have to bring you back because I might have some more epiphanies.
After you finish
come back again. But make sure, where can they purchase the book?
You can purchase the book anywhere you purchase books. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org if you like to shop independent. You can order it from Target. Wherever you order your books, it's nationally distributed. So Daddy's Little Stranger, just type it in and you should be able to find it.
May have to holler at you to help me if I decide to go book deal with my book.
Okay.
And so I don't have book deal patience. And so
yeah, you do have to have some patience.
I ain't got that. I don't self-publish every book I've ever done.
You're like, okay, I'm done. I'm putting it out here. I'm moving on.
I'm putting it out here. We get ready to move. I ain't got no time to be having no round table of people talking about my 3 minutes of my life. We ain't doing that.
Not the round table.
We ain't doing that. And so thank you so much for being on I Am Dad podcast. I appreciate you. Hope that Kwame brings us together again soon. Or we just pull ourselves together. We don't need him to pull us together again.
We don't.
And then let me know about that new book. And I am going to put this back in my bag and put a paper clip and keep going through it. And to all of my I Am Dad podcast listeners, you know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor, Art Mitchell, always said to me, it's nice to be important, but you know what, Kenny? It's much more important to be nice. Until next Sunday, peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.
Yeah.